think it was last Sunday's New York Times here, magazine, no, it was February 21st, we shall overcome, this time with algebra, talking about the Bob Moses story and Project Algebra, and how he is taking an educational approach based on the history and experience of African people and using that educational approach to advance the intellectual development of black people in mathematics. Another story here in the Newsweek magazine of September 23rd, 1991, with the cover was Cleopatra Black, an interesting magazine in itself, that talks again about this black school in California, where students pursuing the African ideal at their early morning assembly, called by a Kiswahili name, the school's 42 students, all African American, pledge to think black, act black, speak black, buy black, pray black, love black, and live black. Students sing Bob Marley, not Francis Scott Key. They recite Langston Hughes and not Vachel Lindsay. We have a rich tradition to share, says the executive director, who wears African attire, and a bright future. The Academy's graduates are the only blacks in the local high school's advanced placement classes. In other words, where you see an African-centered curriculum, where you see African people acting on the basis of their African history, you see African intellectual development and superiority occurring. An older magazine you might find of interest in your library, published September 1982, Discover magazine, with an interesting question. IQ, are the Japanese really smarter? You know, a lot of people asking that question today, right? And I think it's interesting here to note the dramatic evidence that there is a disparity between Japanese and American IQ levels appeared in the May issue of Nature, that's the science magazine journal. In a two-page report, Richard Lynn, a British psychologist, cited that in a single generation, I want you to keep this in mind, the national mean IQ score in Japan has risen 7 points. By the way, the mean IQ score for black people has also risen over time as well. And you can raise the average IQ of people. Do not believe in this mythology that your IQ is fixed at birth. People can be taught to be intelligent and can learn to be intelligent. To a great extent, the history of African Americans has been a learning, but a learning to be dumb. It takes intelligence to learn even that. And so, yes, we learn very rapidly. It's not smart to be smart. It's smart to be dumb. You know, that takes a certain amount of reasoning, doesn't it? And perception. You know, you young people there, you learn when your peer groups will call you a nerd for being smart, when you are excluded or rejected because you study, or when they call you a white boy, a white girl, or tell you you're acting white because you read, because you study, because you turn in your homework. You learn very rapidly, don't you, to give it up, to put on the dumb act, to actually become dumb, to work hard at being dumb, so you can be what? Accepted and loved. That's a smart move, right? It's a smart, dumb move. And yet, so many of our people get it. That means, though, that there was enough intelligence there to see on which side the bread was buttered. But here then, within a single generation, the IQ raised 7 points. And the average IQ for the country's younger generation was the highest in the world. Moreover, according to Lynn's figures, about 10% of Japan's population has an IQ level of more than 130, while only 2% of Americans and Western Europeans achieve that score. Lynn calculated that a full 77% of the Japanese have IQs above Western European and U.S. averages. Now let me just hook into some here. Does that say that they were naturally smarter? Let's look at this. By correlating Japanese and American results, Lin determined that the average Japanese score was 111 compared with the U.S. score of 100. His study did not ignore Japanese adults. Even among those born as early as 1910 and through the groups born in the 1930s and 40s, Japanese consistently scored a few points higher than Americans. But the great mental leap forward, but this was not always the case now, and get this sentence, a lead of 11 points over the Americans did not come until the generation born after World War II. In other words, the Japanese IQ did not surpass the American IQ until after World War II. You say, why did this occur? In other words, the myth that the IQ is fixed is just that, a myth. And as they explored the Japanese schools and explored the Japanese experience, they looked directly at it. Not only did they recognize that the Japanese youngsters stay in school 240 days compared to 180 days in the American schools. And actually, when you count up the amount of time American teachers have to struggle to quiet an American classroom and bring children to order, that difference in class time is probably 360 days to 180 days, you see. So there's no great mystery as to why they are performing the way they do. One quick thing, and I'm through here in a second. In Sendai classroom, they're talking about the Japanese classroom, mathematics consume 25% of first grade classroom time. What do we talk about in education? Time on task. In other words, there is a correlation between the amount of time people put in on a subject and the achievement in that subject. And before you run off into any mysterious genetic explanation as to what is happening to our children in these schools, look first at the amount of time they actually spend studying. And you might find that a good deal of the answer is just right there. In Taipei, that's in Taiwan, 17% of the time is spent studying mathematics. In Minneapolis, 14%. In the 5th grade, the average classroom's time spent on the subject was 23% in Japan, 28% in Taiwan, and 17% in Minneapolis. Homework counts too. In Japan, first graders spend an average of 4 hours every week at homework. In Taiwan, they spend 8 hours a week. In the U.S., they spend 1 hour and 20 minutes. So is there a difference? Is there any mystery to it? By the 5th grade, the average homework minutes were 6 hours for the Japanese, something like 13 for the Taiwanese, and 4 for the Americans. The author concludes, all this suggests to Stevenson that it is indeed the environment rather than heredity that enables the Japanese to perform so well in testing. That Americans, if they are beginning to feel inadequate, should be concerned not about their mental endowment, but about their educational system. Look at us African people with a magnificent genetic inheritance. Look at what the possibilities are for us. If we claim to know who we are, if we embrace our African identity, and if we came to love our African self, if we came to have confidence in ourselves, and if we as a people decided to take responsibility for ourselves, we have been given the most talented children on this earth. We've been given the best brains on this earth. It only now matters that we use them. Thank you very much. Thank you.
I don't know what to say after that, but if you could just hold on a couple of minutes, one of the things we like to do is have a brief question and answer period. Some of you might have questions relating to some of the things that Dr. Amos Wilson talked about that you can have a little dialogue on. So we're going to take about 5 minutes. You can stretch your leg, go to the bathroom. We have some books outside. There's some tapes also of this lecture that will be available for sale upon completion. And I think there's some drinks or something like that outside. So if you can take about 5 minutes, we can come back and get some of your questions answered. Thank you.